Hello and welcome back to Bookish. Today is my last Ernest Hemingway video. I think this is either number 7 or 8 in my series about Ernest Hemingway, and I wanted to kind of sum it all up by just talking about why I think Hemingway matters and why Hemingway should be read. So I made some notes for myself, and so this may be a little bit more, this may be a little bit less casual than normal, but I want to make sure I made my points clearly because I hope in the course of, for those like 5 people who've watched all the Hemingway videos, I hope you've gotten the impression that while I'm a fan of Hemingway's writing, I'm not a fanboy of Ernest Hemingway. I may have started off that way, but I think I see Hemingway with a pretty clear eye, and I think I see his writing in its historical context in a pretty clear way as well. So I wanted to just kind of make this video, and hopefully it won't be a very long video, essentially focusing on why Hemingway still matters as a writer. So I have several points I want to make, and I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So the first point I want to make is that Hemingway is a great writer. You don't have to like Hemingway the person. You don't have to like the subject of Hemingway's stories. I still think you need to read some Hemingway. You need to find a Hemingway story, a novel, just so you can experience Hemingway the writer, because as I'm saying, Hemingway was a great writer. He was an original. He was a craftsman. He worked hard at his writing. He wrote, he rewrote, he edited. He was ruthless against his own work. He had really high ideals about every sentence. His writing style was modernist and intentionally so. He intentionally set out to write differently. His prose is direct. His prose at its best is clear and direct and simple without being simplistic. And I think if you were to take all those qualities of Hemingway's writing and just look at what people consider to be good writing today, you'd find that he matches up with a lot of things people consider to be good writing. And as a matter of fact, while he may not have originated all those things necessarily, he is one of the people who popularized and promoted those ideas as the ideas of good writing. So, oftentimes people focus on the kind of pared down simplicity of Hemingway's prose, but don't be fooled by that. Don't be fooled by the simple declarative sentence style. There's a lot going on in Hemingway. Hemingway oftentimes uses the setting of his stories to give impressions about the emotional content of the story. Oftentimes the room that people are in, the temperature, the physical description of the geography, the view that his characters are looking at is intended to carry weight, to communicate some emotional content, to give you a better idea of what's actually happening in the story. I have a video about Hemingway's use of repetition. You need to know that repetition of words, that repetition of imagery is not accidental. He did it intentionally to emphasize the things that he thought the story was really about, without spelling it out all on the page. At his best, there is nothing in a Hemingway sentence, in a Hemingway paragraph, that is superfluous. There's nothing that's filler and add-on, no matter what anybody tells you. So another thing I think that oftentimes gets lost in discussion about Hemingway, and we forget about Hemingway, is that Hemingway was trying to create an emotional reaction in the reader that, by not directly describing the emotional reaction of his characters. One of Hemingway's mantras was not to describe an emotion, but to create that emotion. Hemingway is, a writer who sees himself establishing a relationship with his reader, and wanting his reader to participate and in the story, to almost be privy to the psychological situation of his characters. And that's really what he's trying to do, and that's one of those things that I think we oftentimes forget, is that Hemingway is writing, and everything in Hemingway's writing is intended to create an emotional response, to put the reader in the position of knowing the emotional, unstated content of the stories. So my last point about Hemingway is actually a multi-part point, and that is how influential Hemingway's style has been. There are a number of things about Hemingway's writing and and his self-developed style of writing that have carried over and are considered to be, basics of good writing today. Famously, Hemingway described his writing like an iceberg with only about 10% visible, but the knowledge that this other 90% was there. In a sense, this is a version of show don't tell. One of the old writing mantras is you should show stuff and not tell it. Well, Hemingway doesn't even really want to show it. He wants you to almost intuit it, to feel it, to emotionally know that there's something below the surface, that there's a lot below the surface that isn't being seen, and for that to really be what the story's about. And therefore that 10% that he shows you is in lots of ways all just kind of clues and hints and images and ideas he's trying to convey about that part of the story that you don't see. There's always an unstated, in the best Hemingway I should say, there's always an unstated text. There's always more than just what's being described. And in a sense, that is at the heart, I think, of show don't tell in your writing. Second, Hemingway is famous for putting a great deal of emphasis on dialogue, and that dialogue being the way in which he wants to convey emotion, and dialogue being the way in which he wants to reveal things about his characters. Oftentimes people mischaracterize this by saying Hemingway wrote the way people actually spoke. I really don't think that's true at all. If Hemingway wrote the way people actually spoke, you and I wouldn't be able to pick up on the clues he leaves about his characters, about the emotional situation, about the backstory, about that 90% of the iceberg that he's not describing. He writes in a way so the dialogue carries that message. It may not be actually how people spoke. So my fourth point is that Hemingway is the master of write what you know. A lot of good writing advice boils down to write what you know about. If you don't like the subject of Hemingway's stories, then that's probably because you don't like the things that Hemingway did. But you can't fault Hemingway for not writing what he knew. If Hemingway writes about bullfighting, he writes from a position of expertise. And as a matter of fact, Hemingway was acknowledged as an expert in bullfighting. His discussion about war is taken from the point of view of someone who was in war. And I know people like to think Hemingway exaggerated his wartime experience in World War I, but the man was wounded in a combat situation. That's kind of a big deal. And they kind of talk about Hemingway positioning himself as a warrior, as a hunter, as all these things. He didn't position himself as those things. He did those things. He was a war correspondent. He was with the partisans in the Spanish Civil War. He covered those stories. He landed on the beaches at D-Day, and he covered that story. No matter how egotistical he was, and he was, no matter how big of a jerk he was, and he wrote about what he knew. And you can rest assured that if he's writing about it, there's some level of expertise that he's acquired, which oftentimes makes for good writing. This goes back to Hemingway's, idea of the way to get started in writing is to try to write one true sentence and then to repeat that sentence should be as true as possible. And part of that for Hemingway meant he had to know what he was talking about. And the last thing I want to mention that I think is important about Hemingway's writing style, which had a lot of influence and makes him a great writer, is Hemingway's attempt to cut back on adjectives and adverbs and instead have his verbs carry the descriptor of what was happening to convey, detail through the verbs he chose. This is just another way of saying active writing. A short declarative sentence is a sentence with an active verb. It's not written in the passive voice. And as most people will tell you, writing in an active voice and having what I'm going to call muscular verbs, verbs that actually carry some weight, verbs that have meaning, verbs that imply meaning, is a part of good writing. And Hemingway was one of the foremost practitioners of that idea. And again, his influence on American writers and writers around the world in that way really is almost immeasurable. Anyway, that was my last video about why Hemingway still matters, why you should still read Hemingway, and it kind of boils down to the idea that Hemingway was a great writer. You can scoff at what he wrote about, you can hold it against him that generations of lesser writers turned his style into dude bro lit, But Hemingway was original, he was a craftsman, he was an artist. He was a great writer, and he should still be read. So I hope you find a Hemingway novel or story that you think you can get into, and even if you don't end up liking the story itself, I hope you can appreciate the craftsmanship and the artistry of the writing. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments, and thanks for watching.